Look at this map. Go on, really look at it. Spain and Portugal share the same rocky peninsula, the same rivers, the same blistering sun, the same language roots, even the same wine grapes. For 5 centuries, every powerful empire in Europe looked at this map and said the same thing. These two countries should just be one. Geographers called it inevitable. Generals called it obvious. And Spain? Spain tried to make it happen, with armies, with marriages, with gold, and with brute political force. And yet, that border is still there. This is the story of how a small kingdom on the western edge of the world weaponized geography, tactical brilliance, and a radical obsession with the ocean to stay sovereign against all odds. Here's why everyone assumed the merger was inevitable. The Iberian Peninsula looks from above like one giant natural unit. Shared river systems, the Tagus, the Douro, the Guadiana, flow straight from east to west, crossing what would become the border as if geography itself refused to acknowledge it. The central Meseta Plateau, a vast flat highland dominating the interior, screams one unified kingdom. So what went wrong? Everything. Because the Meseta, Spain's great unifying heartland, was actually Portugal's greatest defense mechanism. The plateau breeds an inward-looking, land-based civilization, castle builders, continent thinkers. But Portugal sits on the edge of that plateau, squeezed between mountains and the Atlantic. It had no choice but to look outward. And then there are the mountains, the Serra da Estrela, the Peneda Gerês, ancient, rugged, unforgiving ridgelines that turned Portugal's eastern frontier into a tactical nightmare for any invader. These weren't just hills, they were natural fortresses, choke points that turned every Spanish advance into a grinding, costly slog. Geography didn't unify the peninsula, it divided it into 2 very different civilizations with 2 very different ambitions. August 14th, 1385. A small hill near a Portuguese town called Aljubarrota, and the fate of an entire nation hangs in the balance. Here's the situation. Portugal's royal line has just collapsed. King Fernando died without a male heir, and his daughter Beatriz is married to, you guessed it, the King of Castile. Juan I of Castile now has a legal claim to the Portuguese throne. His army? Roughly 20,000 men, French mercenary knights, heavy cavalry, a war machine. Portugal's new king, João of the House of Aviz, has maybe 7,000 fighters. It should have been a slaughter. But João's brilliant constable, Nuno Alvarez Pereira, had been studying war like it was a religion. He chose the battlefield himself, a flattened hilltop flanked on both sides by small creeks, compressing the wide Castilian front into a narrow killing corridor. His troops dug trenches. They built brushwood barricades. They placed archers and crossbowmen, including around 200 veteran English longbowmen, fresh from the 100 Years' War, on the flanks. When the Castilian French cavalry charged, they rode straight into chaos. The archers and crossbowmen unleashed hell from the sides. The ditches and pits shattered their formation before they even reached the Portuguese line. The knights, armored, trained, elite, were forced to dismount, break their lances, and fight in cramped, confused close quarters. By nightfall, so many Castilian bodies lay in the field that they were damming the creeks. João I offered the survivors amnesty and safe passage home. Castile declared a national mourning period that lasted until Christmas of 1387. 2 years of mourning for one afternoon's battle. Portugal's independence wasn't just preserved, it was cemented. The House of Aviz was established. A new era had begun. And João's 4th son would go on to become one of the most consequential figures in world history, Prince Henry the Navigator. Here's the move that made Portuguese independence permanent, not just militarily, but economically. While Spain turned inward, consolidating its kingdoms, obsessing over the continental European chessboard. Portugal made a bet that looked insane at the time. It bet on the ocean. Prince Henry the Navigator, son of the very king who won at Aljubarrota, set up his court at Sagres, on Portugal's southwestern tip, the literal edge of the known world. He gathered mathematicians, geographers, and the best cartographers in Europe. He commissioned a new ship, the Caravel, lighter, faster, and capable of sailing open ocean rather than hugging coastlines. His goal? Find what was beyond the horizon. By 1434, Portuguese ships had rounded Cape Bojador, a coastal point so feared that sailors called it the Cape of No Return. By 1488, Bartolomeu Dias rounded the Cape of Good Hope. By 1498, Vasco da Gama had reached India by sea, cracking open the most profitable trade route in history. Suddenly, Lisbon wasn't a backwater on the edge of the peninsula. It was the center of the world. Portugal had strategically decoupled its economy from Europe's landlocked trade networks. Its wealth now flowed not from Castile's permission, but from the Indian Ocean, the African coast, and eventually Brazil. You can't absorb a country whose treasury is being filled by ships sailing 10,000 miles away. Spain watched. Spain was impressed. And Spain eventually decided if you can't beat them, buy them. In 1578, Portugal's young King Sebastian led a catastrophic military adventure into Morocco and got himself killed, along with most of Portugal's nobility. It was a dynastic disaster. The royal line collapsed, and Philip II of Spain, who happened to be the grandson of a Portuguese king, saw his moment. In 1580, Spanish armies marched into Portugal. Philip was crowned Philip I of Portugal. The Iberian Union was real, but here's the thing Spain didn't understand. It had conquered Portugal's crown, not Portugal's identity. Philip promised to keep the two empires legally separate. Portuguese colonies would stay in Portuguese hands. But over 60 years, those promises eroded. Spain dragged Portugal into its own wars, against the Dutch, against the English. Portugal's overseas empire began to collapse, as Spain's enemies became Portugal's enemies by default. Dutch fleets raided Portuguese colonies across Asia and Brazil. The spice trade dried up. The resentment boiled. On December 1st, 1640, Portuguese nobles stormed the palace in Lisbon, threw the Spanish viceroy's secretary out of a window, and declared the Duke of Braganza as Juan IV of Portugal. The Iberian Union was over in a single morning. So why does that border still exist? It wasn't luck. It wasn't stubbornness. It was a layered 700-year strategy. It was crossbowmen in perfect defensive formation on a hilltop in 1385. It was a prince who chose the ocean over the continent. It was caravel hulls cutting through African waves instead of cavalry charging across Spanish plains. It was a national identity so distinct, so culturally and economically offshore, that even 60 years of shared monarchy couldn't dissolve it. Spain looked at the map and saw an obvious merger. Portugal looked at the map and saw a coastline and sailed away, and that made all the difference.